It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Margaret Nash laughed as she slid a toddler's picture book across the mahogany table toward Emma in front of the entire scholarship committee. The sound was sharp, like glass breaking in a quiet room, and it hung over the formal dinner service at the Nash estate. The book, titled A Day at the Farm ***, looked absurd resting next to the heavy sterling silver and the delicate bone china. Victoria Nash felt the familiar, cold tightening in her chest. She didn't look at the book. Instead, she kept her eyes on her 12-year-old daughter. Emma sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the bright, primary colors of the cover. The girl didn't flinch, but Victoria saw the slight tremor in her daughter's shoulders, the only sign of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "I thought it might be more your speed, dear," Margaret said, her voice dripping with a practiced, grandmotherly concern that never reached her eyes. She adjusted the strand of pearls at her throat, her diamonds catching the light of the crystal chandelier. "Since the entrance exams for the academy proved to be such a challenge for you." Arthur Nash nodded from the head of the table, his expression one of stony disappointment. He didn't look at his granddaughter. He looked at the empty space above her head, as if Emma were a stain on the family tapestry that he couldn't quite scrub away. "The Nash legacy is built on academic excellence, Victoria," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We cannot have the family name associated with remedial efforts." "It's not remedial, Father," Victoria said, her voice calm and level. She reached out, her fingers grazing the stem of her wine glass. The condensation was ice cold against her skin, a grounding sensation in the heat of her rising pulse. "Emma has a different way of processing information. Her mind works in patterns and structures that most people can't even visualize." "Oh, Victoria, let's not sugarcoat it," Rachel Nash Sterling interrupted, leaning forward with a sympathetic tilt of her head that was entirely performative. Rachel looked radiant in her designer silk, a stark contrast to Victoria's simple, charcoal gray blazer. "We all saw the scores. Sophia, on the other hand, practically broke the curve. The dean said she's the most promising student they've seen in a decade." Rachel glanced at her own daughter. Sophia Sterling sat across from Emma, looking uncomfortable in her stiff lace dress. The golden grandchild didn't join in the laughter. Instead, she looked at Emma with a mixture of pity and something else, something that looked remarkably like guilt. Sophia knew the truth, even if the adults refused to see it. She had seen the sketches in Emma's notebook, complex architectural renderings and chemical equations that Sophia couldn't begin to decipher. "Sophia is a credit to the family," Margaret added, her smile widening as she turned toward her favorite grandchild. "She understands the weight of the Sterling and Nash names. She doesn't spend her time daydreaming or struggling with basic literacy." The insult was calculated. It was meant to draw blood, and Victoria felt the sting of it on her daughter's behalf. This was the environment she had tried so hard to shield Emma from, a world where worth was measured in test scores and pedigree, where a brilliant mind was dismissed because it didn't conform to a century-old standard. Emma finally spoke, her voice small but remarkably steady. "The farm book is nice, grandmother. The colors are very vibrant." Margaret's laugh returned, more mocking this time. "Hear that? She likes the colors. Perhaps we should look into an art program for the less gifted. Something where she can work with her hands since her brain seems to hit a wall with the printed word." Victoria's phone vibrated against her thigh in her pocket. It was a rhythmic, insistent pulse. She knew what it was. It was a notification from the patent office, a confirmation she had been waiting for 6 months. She didn't pull it out. She didn't need to. The knowledge of what was on that screen was a secret weight, a weapon she wasn't quite ready to unsheath. "Emma is quite gifted with her hands," Victoria said, her smile sharpening just a fraction. "And her brain is doing just fine, Mother." "Better than you might think." "Is that why you're still living in that little apartment on the edge of the city?" Arthur asked, his eyes finally dropping to meet Victoria's. "Because you're so confident in your choices. You walked away from the family firm to protect her, and look where it's landed you. You're a consultant for firms that barely exist, and your daughter is being mocked by her own peers because she can't read a simple proctor's exam." Julian Vane, the family's longtime attorney, sat at the far end of the table. He had been silent throughout the exchange, his eyes moving between the family members with the detached interest of a biologist watching a predator hunt. He caught Victoria's eye for a brief second. He knew her better than anyone else in the room. He had seen the private filings. He had seen the way Victoria had quietly liquidated her personal assets to fund Emma's hobbies. Julian cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. "The academy is quite rigorous, Arthur, but there are other institutions, perhaps more modern ones." "The Nash family doesn't do modern," Margaret snapped. "We do excellence, we do tradition." She turned back to Emma, her eyes narrowing. "Eat your dinner, Emma, and take your book. I wouldn't want you to fall behind on your pictures." Victoria watched as Emma reached out and took the coloring book. The girl's movements were slow, deliberate. She placed the book on the chair beside her, her expression unreadable. Victoria felt a surge of pride so fierce it nearly choked her. Emma wasn't breaking. She was observing. She was learning exactly who these people were. "You're right, Mother," Victoria said, standing up. The movement was sudden enough that Rachel jumped slightly, nearly spilling her wine. "Excellence is important, and so is recognizing when a tradition has become a cage." "Sit down, Victoria," Arthur commanded. "We haven't finished the main course." "Actually, we have," Victoria replied. She looked at Julian, a silent command passing between them. The lawyer gave a microscopic nod. "Emma and I have a lot of work to do tonight. There's a new project launching tomorrow, and it requires a level of intelligence that I'm afraid this table just can't provide." "A project?" Rachel sneered, her lip curling. "What, a new bake sale? A tutoring session for the slow learners?" Victoria didn't answer. She leaned down and kissed the top of Emma's head. "Get your coat, Emma, we're leaving." "You leave this table now, and you can forget about the trust fund," Margaret warned, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. "You can forget about the Nash name. You'll be nothing but a footnote in the family history." Victoria paused at the doorway, her hand on the heavy oak frame. The scent of expensive floor wax and stale tradition seemed to cling to the very air. She turned back, her gaze sweeping over her parents and her sister. They looked so small, huddled together in their circle of inherited wealth and borrowed prestige. "The trust fund was never for Emma," Victoria said, her voice carrying a chilling finality. "It was for you, to keep us under your thumb. But you see, Mother, the thing about brilliant minds is that they don't need your permission to succeed. They just need you to get out of the way." She looked at the coloring book one last time, then at the diamonds on Margaret's hand. "Keep the book," Victoria added. "I think you'll find the pictures easier to understand than the legal documents that are going to be landing on this table on Monday morning." As they walked out into the cool night air, Emma gripped Victoria's hand. The girl looked up, her eyes bright and sharp in the moonlight. "Did you get the notification, Mom?" Victoria pulled her phone from her pocket and showed her the screen. The patent for the Nash-Vane neural interface had been approved. It was a technology Emma had designed in her bedroom, a system that translated spatial thought into digital code, a bridge for minds like hers. It was worth more than the entire Nash estate. "I got it," Victoria whispered, "and they have no idea what's coming next." Behind them, the lights of the manor burned bright, a gilded cage that was about to be rattled to its very foundation. Victoria unlocked the car, the sound of the chime a signal of a new beginning. The countdown had started. In 48 hours, the Nash family would realize that the girl they had mocked for not being able to read their world was about to rewrite it entirely. The scent of lilies was suffocating. Victoria Nash stood in the center of the Nash-Vane boardroom, her fingers tracing the edge of a mahogany table that had seen 3 generations of her family's cold calculations. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city hummed, oblivious to the fact that the foundations of the Nash empire were already beginning to crack. Victoria had spent a decade in this room as a ghost, a silent observer of her own marginalization. But today, the air felt different. It tasted like the sharp, metallic ozone before a lightning strike. The double doors swung open with a practiced violence. Rachel Nash Sterling swept in, the sharp click of her designer stilettos echoing against the glass walls like a countdown. She didn't look at Victoria. She never did. Instead, she marched to the head of the table, tossing a slim, cream-colored folder onto the polished wood. "You're late for the prep meeting, Victoria," Rachel said, her voice dripping with the effortless condescension she had perfected since childhood. She adjusted the lapel of her silk blazer, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for dust. "Though I suppose punctuality is a lot to ask from someone who spends her mornings coddling a child who can't even read a basic primer." Victoria didn't flinch. She watched her sister, noting the way Rachel's expensive citrus perfume, the kind that cost more than a month's rent for most people, clung to the air. Behind Rachel, 2 junior associates scurried in, their heads bowed, clutching tablets like shields. They were witnesses to the daily ritual of Victoria's humiliation. "Emma is fine, Rachel," Victoria said, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the room. "She's more capable than you realize." Rachel laughed, a high, brittle sound that set Victoria's teeth on edge. "Capable? The girl is 12 and still struggles with a menu. Let's be realistic. Mother and father have already decided. We're redirecting the Emma Nash Educational Trust into Sophia's international debutante tour. Sophia is the future of this family's public face. Emma is a private matter, a liability we've carried long enough." There it was, the first rage spike. Victoria felt the heat rise in her chest, the familiar urge to scream, but she channeled it into the steady rhythm of her breathing. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing the cool, embossed seal of the patent approval document. "Not yet. That trust was established by our grandfather," Victoria reminded her, her tone deceptively mild. "It was meant for Emma's future." "The future is for those who can seize it," Rachel snapped, finally turning to look at Victoria. Her eyes were hard, devoid of anything resembling sisterly affection. She gestured to the associates. "Clear Victoria's things from the side table. We need the space for the gala floor plans. Victoria, you can sit in the back. Your input isn't required for the branding strategy anyway." One of the associates hesitated, glancing at Victoria with a flicker of pity before reaching for her leather portfolio. "Don't touch that," Victoria said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command, delivered with a cold precision that made the associate freeze. Rachel arched a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Excuse me." "The portfolio stays," Victoria said. She walked slowly toward the table, her movements fluid and deliberate. She felt the weight of the secret she carried, the technology Emma had built, the bridge between thought and code that would make the Nash Vane legacy look like a collection of stone tools. The tension in the room thickened. Rachel opened her mouth to deliver another stinging dismissal, but the door opened again. Julian Vane entered, his silver hair catching the morning light. As the family's primary legal counsel, he was the keeper of their darkest secrets and their brightest assets. He carried a briefcase that looked heavy with the weight of law. "Ah, Julian," Rachel said, her face instantly shifting into a mask of professional charm. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the reallocation of the trust funds. I assume the paperwork is ready for the board to sign tomorrow." Julian didn't answer immediately. He stopped at the foot of the table, his gaze shifting between the two sisters. He looked at Rachel, then at Victoria. To Rachel's visible irritation, he didn't offer her the seat at the head of the table. He remained standing. "There's been a development," Julian said, his voice grave. "A significant one." Rachel sighed, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "If this is about the zoning for the new research wing, it can wait. We have a gala to plan." "It's not about zoning," Julian said. He looked at Victoria, and for the first time in years, Victoria saw something in the lawyer's eyes that wasn't dismissive. It was respect. "It's about a patent filing. A Nash Vane neural interface was approved by the federal office late last night." Rachel scoffed. "Arthur and Margaret haven't authorized any new filings this quarter. It's likely a clerical error." "It wasn't filed by Arthur or Margaret," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "It was filed by an independent entity. one that holds the primary rights to the core technology our entire firm has been trying to develop for a decade. Victoria watched the color begin to drain from Rachel's face. It was a slow process, a gradual fading of the arrogant flush that usually defined her features. Rachel looked at the portfolio on the side table, then back at Victoria. "What are you talking about?" Rachel demanded, her voice losing its melodic edge. "Who owns it?" Victoria stepped forward, the sound of her own shoes on the floor sounding like the strike of a gavel. She reached out and pulled the portfolio toward her, the leather smooth and cool under her palm. 47 hours, Rachel," Victoria said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. 47 hours until what? Rachel's voice pitched higher, the first cracks of panic appearing in her composure. Victoria didn't answer. She looked at Julian, who gave a single, imperceptible nod. The lawyer knew. He had seen the filing. He knew that the liability Rachel had just dismissed was now the most powerful person in the room. "I think I will take that seat after all," Victoria said, gesturing to the chair at the head of the table. Rachel stood her ground, her knuckles white as she gripped the mahogany. "This is my room, my meeting. You are nothing but a glorified babysitter in this company, Victoria. Don't you forget it." Victoria leaned in, the scent of Rachel's lilies now replaced by the cold, clean scent of victory. "The gala is in 2 days, isn't it? The one where Margaret and Arthur plan to announce the future of the Nash legacy." "Yes," Rachel hissed, "and Sophia will be at the center of it." Victoria smiled, a sharp, thin expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Make sure the guest list is perfect, Rachel. I'd hate for anyone to miss the moment the world finds out who actually owns the ground you're standing on." She turned and walked toward the door, leaving the silence of the room to collapse in her wake. Behind her, she heard the frantic rustle of paper as Rachel scrambled toward Julian, demanding explanations he wasn't yet authorized to give. Victoria stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut on Rachel's mounting shadow. She pulled her phone from her pocket and sent a 3-word message to the secure server Emma had set up. "The fuse is lit." As the elevator descended, Victoria felt the weight of the last 10 years falling away. The Nash family thought they were preparing for a celebration of their own greatness. They had no idea they were actually building the stage for their own public execution. The countdown wasn't just for a patent reveal. It was for the moment the sleeping lion finally opened its eyes. The scent of ionized air and soldering flux always acted as a sedative for Victoria. In the cramped confines of the garage, tucked behind a false wall of stacked storage bins and holiday decorations, the world of the Nash family didn't exist. Here, the hum of high-end server racks replaced the shrill demands of her parents, and the cool glow of triple-monitor setups provided the only light she needed. Emma sat at the center of this digital hive, her small frame swallowed by an oversized ergonomic chair. To the teachers at her private academy, Emma Nash was a struggle student, a girl who tripped over her own tongue during reading aloud and stared blankly at math sheets. But here, with a haptic glove on her right hand and a logic analyzer on her left, she was a god of her own making. "The encryption on the legacy drive was laughable, Mom," Emma said, not looking up as her fingers danced across a holographic interface. "Grandpa Arthur thinks a rotating cipher is high security. I cracked it between my history homework and dinner." Victoria leaned against the workbench, her fingers brushing the cold, brushed aluminum casing of a prototype. This was the weapon. For 10 years, Arthur and Margaret had built their empire on a foundation of Nash innovation. But the core algorithms had actually been the work of Victoria's late husband, work that had been legally buried and then resurrected under Arthur's name. Now, Emma had found the digital fingerprints they'd missed. "It's all there?" Victoria asked, her voice low. "Every line of code, every timestamp," Emma replied. She finally turned, her eyes bright with a sharp, adult clarity that few ever saw. "They didn't just steal the tech, Mom. They've been licensing the subroutines to Julian Vane's competitors under the table. They're cannibalizing their own company to hide the paper trail." A heavy knock echoed through the garage, the sound of a fist against the side door. It wasn't the rhythmic tap of a friend. It was the sharp, entitled beat of someone who expected to be served. "Hide the screen," Victoria whispered. Emma tapped a key, and the high-tech laboratory vanished, replaced by the flickering, dim light of a single bulb and a table covered in messy, hand-drawn sketches that looked like the scribblings of a confused child. Victoria opened the door to find Rachel Nash Sterling standing on the driveway, her designer heels clicking irritably against the oil-stained concrete. She held a silk scarf over her nose as if the very air of Victoria's home was contaminated. "Honestly, Victoria, how you can breathe in this hovel is beyond me," Rachel said, stepping inside without an invitation. She glanced at Emma, who was hunched over a drawing of a lopsided robot. "Still playing with your little toys, Emma? It's a shame, really." Sophia just received her early acceptance to the summer conservatory. "I suppose some children are born to lead, and others are born to tinker." Victoria felt her nails dig into her palms, but she kept her expression as flat as a frozen lake. "We're busy, Rachel. What do you want?" Rachel pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from her Prada bag. It was embossed with the Nash family crest in gold leaf. "Mother and father are finalized with the Gala arrangements. It's going to be the event of the decade. The patent reveal will change everything for our standing." She tossed the envelope onto the workbench, where it landed on a smudge of grease. "I've brought your instructions." "Instructions?" Victoria asked, picking up the envelope. "Well, you didn't think you'd be sitting at the head table, did you?" Rachel let out a soft, melodic laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Given your current social standing and Emma's recent academic difficulties, it would be best if you stayed behind the scenes. I've spoken to the catering manager. He's agreed to let you and Emma assist with the gift bags and the coat check. It's a way for you to be involved without being an embarrassment to the Sterling name." The audacity of the suggestion hung in the air like a foul odor. Rachel wasn't just asking for help. She was attempting to relegate her own sister to the status of a servant at a celebration built on Victoria's husband's stolen legacy. "You want us to work the coat check at our own family's gala?" Victoria's voice was dangerously calm. "It's a mercy, darling," Rachel said, reaching out to pat Victoria's cheek. Victoria flinched away before the contact could land. Rachel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening. "It keeps people from asking why the eldest Nash daughter looks like she buys her clothes from a bin, and it keeps Emma away from the press. We wouldn't want her to have one of her episodes when the cameras are flashing, would we? The board is already nervous enough about the family's intellectual legacy. We don't need a reminder that the bloodline has weakened." Emma's hand tightened around her pencil, the wood snapping with a sharp crack. Rachel didn't even notice. She was too busy checking her reflection in a dusty mirror on the wall. "I'll consider it," Victoria said, her voice tight. "Do more than consider it. It's an order from father," Rachel snapped, her facade of sisterly concern finally dropping. "Don't ruin this for us, Victoria. This patent is Sophia's future. It's our ticket to the global stage. If you show up and make a scene, I will make sure you're cut off entirely. Not even this garage will be yours." Rachel turned on her heel and marched out, her perfume, a cloying, expensive scent of lilies and musk, lingering in the air long after her car roared away. The silence that followed was heavy. Victoria turned to find Julian Vane standing in the shadows of the garage's rear entrance. He had been there the whole time, a silent witness to the humiliation. "She's getting bolder," Julian said, stepping into the light. He looked at the cream-colored envelope on the bench. "And more foolish." "Do you have the filings, Julian?" Victoria asked. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a set of blue-backed legal documents. These weren't the instructions Rachel had delivered. These were the counter filings for the International Patent Office. "The moment Arthur Nash stands on that stage to claim ownership of the Neuralink processor, these go live," Julian said. "I've secured the testimony from the original research team in Zurich. They're tired of being paid in hush money. They want the credit they were promised." Victoria looked at her daughter. Emma had already cleared the distraction screen, and the real data was back. The girl was looking at a digital map of the gala's ballroom, her eyes tracking the security nodes and the central projection system. "Rachel wants us in the coat check," Emma said, a small, predatory smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That's perfect, actually. The main server hub for the ballroom is located right behind the cloakroom." Victoria felt a chill of pure, cold satisfaction. Her sister's arrogance had provided them with the perfect tactical position. By trying to hide them, Rachel was giving them the keys to the kingdom. 2 days, Victoria whispered, looking at the gold-embossed envelope. 2 days until the world finds out that the weakened branch of the family is the only one with any real power. She picked up the invitation and slowly tore it in half, the thick paper resisting before giving way with a satisfying rip. She dropped the pieces into the trash. "Julian, make sure the press list is expanded," Victoria said, her gaze fixed on the monitors. "I want every major tech journalist in the country there. If the Nash family wants a show, we're going to give them one they'll never forget." Julian nodded, his expression solemn. "And the risk, Victoria. If this fails, they'll destroy you." Victoria looked at Emma, who was already back to coding, her brilliant mind spinning circles around the people who called her slow. She thought of the wine stain on her dress from the night before, the sneer on her mother's face, and the way Rachel had looked at her garage. "They already tried to destroy me," Victoria said. "They just didn't realize I was building something better in the ruins." She reached out and touched the encrypted drive, the metal cold against her skin. The countdown had begun. In 48 hours, the sleeping lion wouldn't just be awake, it would be hungry. And Rachel Nash Sterling was about to find out exactly what happened when you invited a predator into your home and told it to wait in the kitchen. The Nash Conservatory smelled of damp earth and over-fertilized orchids, a humid, stifling heat that clung to the skin like a guilty conscience. Victoria Nash stepped onto the checkered marble, her flats silent compared to the aggressive rhythmic clicking of designer heels echoing from the far end of the glass room. She didn't need to look up to know her sister was approaching. The scent of Rachel's perfume, a cloying, expensive jasmine that cost more than a month's rent, always arrived 30 seconds before she did. Rachel Nash Sterling looked every bit the family's crown jewel in a cream silk jumpsuit that shouted old money, while whispering, newly renovated. She was holding a crystal flute of mimosa, the condensation slicking her perfectly manicured fingers. Behind her, Sophia Sterling walked with her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting toward Victoria with a mixture of guilt and desperate longing. "You're late for the legacy brunch, Victoria," Rachel said, her voice a polished blade of condescension. She didn't offer a hug, she offered a critical scan of Victoria's simple linen dress. "Though I suppose when one doesn't have a schedule to keep or a career to manage, time becomes a bit fluid, doesn't it?" Victoria didn't flinch. She felt the weight of the encrypted drive in her pocket, a cold, hard rectangle of reality against her thigh. "I was ensuring Emma finished her latest project." "Consistency is important for her," Rachel laughed, a sharp, melodic sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, the little science experiments in the garage. How quaint. Mother and father were just saying how worried they are that you're encouraging her fantasies. It's hard enough for a girl with her limitations, without you filling her head with dreams she can't possibly achieve." Sophia flinched at the word limitations, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. Victoria caught her niece's eye for a fraction of a second, seeing the silent apology there. "Emma's mind is a gift, Rachel. You just haven't learned how to open the box yet," Victoria said, her voice steady and low. They moved into the main dining hall, where Margaret and Arthur Nash sat at the head of a mahogany table that could seat 20. Julian Vane sat to Arthur's right, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes lingered on Victoria with a sharp, expectant intensity. The room was a fortress of status. The silver was heavy enough to be used as weaponry, and the portraits of ancestors glared down from the walls as if sensing an interloper in their midst. "Sit, Victoria," Arthur commanded, not looking up from his poached eggs. "We were just discussing the Sterling-Nash merger reveal tomorrow. The tech press is already buzzing. Rachel has secured the cover of *Innovation Weekly for the launch. It's going to be the largest acquisition in the family's history, Margaret added, her voice like dry parchment. She pushed a small, embossed envelope across the table toward Victoria. In light of the family's upcoming windfall, your father and I have decided to be generous. This is a check for $20,000. It's more than enough to get Emma into that specialized vocational school in the valley. The one that teaches them life skills. Folding laundry, basic hygiene, that sort of thing. The silence that followed was heavy. Rachel smirked into her glass. Sophia looked like she wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Victoria looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. The rage was a slow-burning ember in her chest, but she kept her hands perfectly still on the white tablecloth. I'm not here for a handout, Mother. Don't be prideful, Victoria, Rachel snapped, leaning forward. You're living in a drafty house with a child who can barely read a menu. You should be thanking us for cleaning up your mess. In fact, after the launch tomorrow, I might even find a place for you in my new firm. We'll need someone to handle the digital filing. It's repetitive work, perfect for your pace. Victoria looked at her sister, truly looked at her. She saw the frantic need for validation behind the expensive makeup, the way Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the silver sugar tongs. This was the moment, the final bridge. Rachel, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the clink of silverware. Cancel the press conference tomorrow. Tell the board the tech isn't ready. Tell them there's been a strategic delay. The table went dead silent. Arthur put down his fork. Margaret narrowed her eyes. Rachel stared at her sister as if Victoria had suddenly started speaking in tongues. I'm sorry. Cancel the launch that has been 18 months in the making. The launch that is currently funding your parents' retirement and Sophia's trust fund. I'm giving you an olive branch, Victoria said, her gaze never wavering. If you stop now, you can claim it was a technical oversight. You can walk away with your reputation intact. If you go on that stage tomorrow and claim Emma's work as your own, there will be no coming back. Not for you and not for this family. Rachel's face went through a rapid transformation, confusion, then realization, and finally, a sneering, ugly triumph. She threw her head back and laughed, a loud, jagged sound that made the crystal chandelier hum. You're threatened, Rachel gasped, wiping a tear from her eye. That's what this is. You're so desperate, so jealous of my success that you're trying to sabotage the entire family. You think because you spent a few nights helping Emma play with circuit boards that you have some kind of claim to the Sterling-Nash interface. It's pathetic, Victoria. Truly. I am warning you, Rachel, Victoria repeated, her voice dropping an octave. Do not go on that stage. Enough! Arthur slammed his hand on the table, making the china jump. Victoria, if you cannot be a supportive member of this family, you can leave. We will not have you poisoning this house with your bitterness on the eve of our greatest victory. Victoria stood up slowly. She didn't look at her parents. She looked at Julian Vane, who gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was set, the steel jaws open, and Rachel was dancing right into the center of them. I'll leave, Victoria said softly. She turned to Rachel. I wanted you to have one last chance to be the person you pretend to be. I'm sorry you didn't take it. Save your pity for your daughter, Rachel spat, her face flushed with a dark, arrogant heat. Tomorrow, the world is going to know my name. And you'll still be the sister who couldn't keep up, the one who lost everything because she was too slow to see the future. Victoria walked out of the dining room, the sound of Rachel's mocking laughter following her into the hall. As she reached the heavy oak front doors, she felt a small hand catch her sleeve. It was Sophia. The girl's face was pale, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Aunt Victoria, she's not going to stop. She thinks she's untouchable. Victoria reached out and tucked a stray hair behind Sophia's ear. No one is untouchable, Sophia, especially not people who build their thrones on stolen ground. Is it really happening tomorrow? Sophia whispered. Victoria checked her watch. 24 hours. The countdown is over, Sophia. Tomorrow, the lion wakes up. Victoria stepped out into the cool morning air, the heavy doors of the Nash estate clicking shut behind her with a sound like a gavel. She pulled her phone from her pocket and hit the speed dial. "Julian," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as a winter frost. "They didn't take the deal. Release the final invitations to the tech board and call the patent office. We're moving the filing to 9:00 a.m. sharp." She looked back at the house, a monument to arrogance and lies. In 24 hours, the world would see it for exactly what it was, a hollow shell, waiting for the first gust of truth to bring it all crashing down. The grand ballroom of the Pier Hotel smelled of white lilies and old money. It was a scent Victoria Nash knew well, a cloying perfume designed to mask the rot beneath the floorboards. She stood near the velvet-draped entrance, watching the staff adjust the lighting for the Nash Industries' annual shareholder showcase. Crystal flutes chimed against silver trays as waiters circulated, their movements synchronized like clockwork dolls. In the center of the room, under the massive chandelier, Margaret Nash held court. She wore a suit of crushed velvet in a shade of blue that screamed royalty, her neck draped in pearls that cost more than the tuition for the special needs school she had refused to pay for Emma. Victoria smoothed the lapel of her charcoal blazer. It wasn't designer, not yet, but it was tailored to razor sharpness. She checked her phone. 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes. "You came." The voice was breathless. Victoria turned to see Sophia Sterling standing just behind her. Her niece looked pale, her fingers twisting the fabric of her silk dress until the knuckles turned white. "I told you I would," Victoria said, her voice steady. She reached out and gently pried Sophia's fingers loose from the fabric. "Breathe, Sophia. You're not the one on trial today." "Grandmother is in a mood," Sophia whispered, glancing toward the center of the room where Margaret was currently berating a waiter for the ice-to-scotch ratio in Arthur's glass. "She's nervous about the tech demo. The prototype was glitching this morning." "It won't matter," Victoria said. "The prototype isn't the problem." "What do you mean?" "Watch." Victoria moved into the room. Her heels made no sound on the plush carpet, a predator moving through tall grass. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. She was the black sheep, the daughter who had married wrong, the failure who had produced a defective child. Her invitation was a courtesy, a way for her parents to display their benevolence. "Look, we even let the stray dog eat scraps from the table." She caught the eye of Julian Vane near the buffet. The lawyer was nursing a sparkling water, looking bored. He gave her the barest nod, a microscopic dip of his chin, before returning his attention to his phone. The signal was received. The patent office filing was cued. "Victoria." The name was spoken like a curse. Rachel Nash Sterling approached, a glass of champagne already half empty in her hand. She looked brittle, her smile tight enough to snap a violin string. "Rachel," Victoria replied. "You look expensive." Rachel flushed, mistaking the observation for a compliment. "It's custom, but you wouldn't know about that." She looked Victoria up and down, her gaze lingering on the off-the-rack blazer. "I'm surprised you showed up. After the loan rejection, I thought you'd be home." "Licking your wounds." "I prefer to face things head-on," Victoria said. She plucked a glass of water from a passing tray. The condensation was cold against her fingertips, grounding her. "Besides, I wanted to see the new technology Mother is so proud of. The algorithm that's going to revolutionize the industry." Rachel laughed, a harsh, tinny sound that made heads turn. "Oh, honey, it's way over your head. Just try not to embarrass us, okay? Sit in the back, don't speak to the investors." "I'll be perfectly behaved," Victoria promised. "I'm just here to listen." Rachel sneered and moved away, drawn back to Margaret's orbit like a moth to a bug zapper. Victoria watched her go. The pity she used to feel for her sister had evaporated years ago, burned away by the heat of their cruelty toward Emma. A heavy hand landed on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, though the smell of cigar smoke and expensive scotch announced him before he spoke. "You're blocking the walkway," Arthur Nash grumbled. Her father looked older up close. The lines around his eyes were deeper, the capillaries in his nose more broken, but the arrogance was untouched by time. He adjusted his cufflinks, gold, monogrammed, heavy. "Hello, father." "Don't hello, father me," Arthur snapped, keeping his voice low but venomous. "I saw you talking to Vane. Leave the lawyers alone. They're here to work, not to give free advice to charity cases. Victoria took a sip of water. I was just saying hello. Well, say goodbye and fix your hair. You look like you just rolled out of bed. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, using his height to loom over her. It was an old tactic, one that used to make her shrink. Today, she just noticed that his tie was slightly crooked. This creates a legacy, Victoria. This launch. It secures the family name for another 50 years. Don't ruin it with your presence. I wouldn't dream of ruining the legacy, Victoria said. I'm just correcting the authorship. Arthur grunted and pushed past her toward the podium. The room was filling up now. Tech journalists with recording devices, investors with hungry eyes, board members checking their watches. The air grew thick with the hum of anticipation and the scent of heated electronics from the demo stage. Victoria found a spot near the side wall. It wasn't the back where Rachel had banished her, but it wasn't the front either. It was a tactical position, a vantage point. From here she could see everything. She saw Margaret check her reflection in a silver spoon, smoothing a wrinkle that didn't exist. She saw Rachel hiss something at Sophia, making the girl flinch. She saw Arthur shaking hands, pumping arms with the vigor of a man selling a bridge he didn't own. They looked so secure, so untouchable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a single vibration. She slipped it out, shielding the screen with her palm. A text from Dr. Eris Thorne. It's done. Timestamp 8:59:59 a.m. The USPTO has acknowledged receipt. The intellectual property is officially registered to Emma Nash. Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The tension in her chest, a knot that had been tightening for 5 years, suddenly unspooled. It was over. They just didn't know it yet. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room, the kind of reverent silence usually reserved for church services or funerals. A spotlight snapped on, illuminating the podium. Arthur stepped into the light. He gripped the sides of the lectern, beaming. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, his voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. Welcome to the future of Nash Industries. Applause rippled through the room, polite, expectant. For decades, this family has been at the forefront of innovation, Arthur continued. But today we unveil something that transcends mere innovation. We unveil a revolution. He gestured to the curtain behind him. My wife, the visionary behind this project, Margaret Nash. More applause, louder this time. Margaret stepped out, waving like a queen on a balcony. She took the microphone from Arthur, her diamonds catching the spotlight and throwing fractured rainbows across the dark room. Thank you, she purred. This algorithm represents years of tireless work, my asterisk work. Victoria felt a spike of cold rage in her gut. Her asterisk work. The audacity was breathtaking. Margaret couldn't open a PDF without assistance, yet here she was, claiming credit for a code written by a 12-year-old girl she had called slow. We call it the Nexus Protocol, Margaret said, her voice swelling with pride. A system so advanced it predicts market trends before they happen, and it belongs exclusively to Nash Industries. She paused for effect. The audience leaned in. We have already secured preliminary contracts with 3 major defense firms, Margaret announced. Pending the final patent confirmation, which is a formality. Victoria stepped away from the wall. The movement was small, but in the stillness of the room it drew the eye. Julian Vane looked up from his table near the front. He set his glass down. He didn't look at Victoria, he looked at his watch. 9:03 a.m. Margaret was still talking, building to the climax of her speech, the moment where she would ask for the investment checks. We are opening the floor to our founding partners first. A buy-in of $5 million gets you a seat at the table of the future. $5 million, Victoria said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The acoustics of the room carried her voice, calm and clear, cutting through Margaret's monologue like a scalpel. Margaret froze. She squinted into the darkness beyond the spotlight. Excuse me, we are not taking questions yet. It's not a question, Victoria said, walking out of the shadows. She moved down the center aisle. The sound of her heels on the marble floor between the carpet runners was a rhythmic percussion. Click, click, click. Heads turned. Whispers broke out. Who is that? Is that the daughter, the disgrace? Victoria, Arthur hissed from the side of the stage. "Sit down!" She ignored him. She kept walking until she reached the front row. She stopped 10 feet from the stage, looking up at her mother. "I just wanted to clarify the price," Victoria said, her voice pleasant, helpful. "You said $5 million for a seat at the table." "Security," Margaret snapped, her composure cracking. "Remove her. She's unwell." 2 large men in dark suits started toward her from the perimeter. Victoria didn't look at them. She held Margaret's gaze. "I'm feeling perfectly fine, Mother. I'm just confused. You're selling buy-ins for the Nexus protocol." "Yes, you foolish girl," Margaret spat, abandoning the microphone but her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Now leave before I have you dragged out." "But you can't sell it," Victoria said. She reached into her blazer pocket. The sound of the envelope sliding against the fabric was the only noise in the room. "And why is that?" Margaret challenged, her hands gripping the podium so hard her knuckles turned skeletal white. "Because you think you know business better than I do?" Victoria pulled out a single, folded document. The paper was heavy, cream-colored. Official. "No," Victoria said. She unfolded the paper. "Because you don't own it." Arthur stepped forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "That's enough. Get her out of here." The security guards were 5 feet away. "Julian," Victoria said, not taking her eyes off her mother. Julian Vane stood up. The scraping of his chair against the floor was a violence. "Stop," the lawyer ordered. His voice carried the weight of billable hours and legal threats. The security guards hesitated. Margaret looked from Victoria to Julian, a flicker of genuine fear finally cracking her porcelain mask. "Julian, what is this?" Victoria held up the document. The seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office caught the light. "The filing went through 4 minutes ago," Victoria said. "The Nexus protocol, the source code, the underlying architecture." She took one more step toward the stage. "It's not property of Nash Industries, Mother." Victoria smiled, and it was the smile of the lion finally waking up. "And it certainly isn't yours." The ballroom, a cavern of gold leaf and crystal, felt suddenly claustrophobic. Victoria walked toward the central tech hub, the heels of her shoes clicking against the marble with the rhythm of a firing squad. She didn't look back at the security guards, who stood frozen, their eyes darting toward Julian Vane for instruction. The lawyer didn't move a muscle. He simply adjusted his glasses, his gaze fixed on the document in Victoria's hand with the intensity of a vulture over a fresh kill. Margaret found her voice first, though it was thin, a jagged shard of its former authority. "This is a stunt, a pathetic, desperate fabrication. Arthur, why are they still standing there? Get her out." Arthur Nash took a step forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the mahogany podium. "Victoria, you are treading on dangerous ground. Nash Industries built that architecture. We funded the research. You were a mere administrator." "I was a mother," Victoria corrected, her voice low and steady. She reached the control panel and tapped a sequence into her personal device. The massive LED wall behind the stage, which had been flickering with the Nash Industries logo, suddenly went dark. Then a single line of code appeared. It was handwritten, scrawled in a child's messy, looping script, then translated into the cleanest, most efficient C++ the board members had ever seen. A murmur rippled through the crowd. These were the titans of the industry, the men and women who lived and breathed innovation. They recognized brilliance when it was laid bare. "That's Emma's handwriting," Sophia Sterling whispered. She had moved closer to the stage, her eyes wide, a strange mix of terror and adoration on her face. Beside her, Rachel Nash Sterling gripped her daughter's arm so hard her manicured nails left red crescents in the girl's skin. Rachel's face was a mask of confusion, her loyalty to the family legacy warring with the undeniable truth on the screen. "Look at the metadata," Victoria said, her voice projecting to the back of the hall. The core logic wasn't developed in a Nash lab. It was developed on a modified tablet in a bedroom you called a rehabilitation suite. The timestamps date back 3 years. Every time you told Emma she was failing her tutors, she was building the future of decentralized computing. Margaret's face didn't just pale. It seemed to physically erode under the harsh glow of the LED screens. Her perfectly painted lips trembled, losing their sharp, crimson line as her jaw slackened. The arrogance that usually sat behind her eyes like a frozen lake shattered, replaced by a frantic, darting terror. She looked smaller, the heavy diamonds at her throat suddenly appearing like a weight she could no longer carry. Her breath came in sharp, audible hitches that rattled against the sudden, tomb-like silence of the ballroom. Every line of her carefully preserved skin seemed to deepen, betraying her age and her sudden, agonizing vulnerability. She looked at Arthur, but for the first time in 40 years, he had no answer for her. Arthur was staring at Julian Vane. "Julian, tell them it's ours." Julian stepped into the light, his expression unreadable. He looked at the screen, then at the physical patent Victoria held. "I've reviewed the filing, Arthur. It's an independent intellectual property claim backed by a private trust. The beneficiary isn't Victoria, it's Emma Nash." He paused, the silence stretching until it felt like it would snap. "And as of 4 minutes ago, the trust has issued a cease and desist to Nash Industries. You are prohibited from using the protocol for the merger." The board members didn't wait for a second invitation. The man who had been Arthur's closest ally, a silver-haired shark named Marcus, stood up and smoothed his suit jacket. He didn't look at Arthur. He looked at Victoria. "If the protocol is off the table, the Nash valuation is 0. The merger is dead." One by one, the people at the head table began to stand. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They simply moved away from Margaret and Arthur, creating a physical void around the two people who had ruled them for decades. It was a social excommunication, swift and total. "You're stealing from your own family," Margaret hissed, her voice a desperate, venomous rasp. "After everything we gave you, the house, the protection, the name, you gave us a cage," Victoria said. She stepped down from the stage, her eyes finding Emma in the back of the room. The girl was standing tall, her hand no longer twisting her shirt, her eyes bright with the realization that she didn't have to hide anymore. "And you didn't give it to us. We bought our freedom with the very genius you tried to suppress." Victoria stopped in front of her mother. The smell of Margaret's expensive, floral perfume was cloying, the scent of a dying empire. Victoria didn't shout. She didn't have to. "You spent 12 years trying to fix a child who was never broken, just to steal the light she created. Now you're in the dark." Victoria turned her back on them. She didn't stay to watch Arthur's futile attempt to grab Julian's sleeve. She didn't stay to hear Rachel's frantic excuses to the departing board members. She walked straight to Emma, took her daughter's hand, and led her toward the heavy oak doors of the ballroom. They stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of the gala fading into a pathetic, distant hum. Victoria felt the weight of the last decade fall away, replaced by the sharp, clean chill of the wind. "Where are we going, Mom?" Emma asked, her voice small but steady. Victoria squeezed her hand. "To the airport, Emma. We have a meeting in Palo Alto tomorrow morning. With people who actually know how to read your poetry." Behind them, the first of the news alerts began to chime on the phones of the guests inside. The Nash empire wasn't just falling, it was being erased. And Victoria Nash didn't look back once. The silver warming trays of the Sterling Nash Country Club hissed with a rhythmic, mocking steam, smelling of over-seasoned hollandaise and expensive bacon. It was the Sunday Grand Buffet, an event that, for 40 years, had served as the unofficial court of the Nash family. Arthur Nash sat at the central round table, his silk tie knotted with a precision that belied the frantic tremor in his fingers. Beside him, Margaret stared straight ahead, her spine a rigid line of denial, while Rachel poked at a plate of smoked salmon as if it were evidence of a crime. The room was full, yet a strange, hollow silence radiated from their table. The surrounding elite, families who had toasted the Nashes only 48 hours ago, now navigated the buffet line with surgical precision to avoid making eye contact. The clatter of forks on porcelain sounded like distant gunfire. "It's a temporary liquidity issue," Arthur muttered, his voice raspy. He reached for his crystal water goblet, but his hand shook so violently the ice chimed against the glass. "Julian will have the injunctions filed by noon. We'll sue the news outlets for every cent they have for printing those lies about the trust." "They aren't lies, Arthur," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. She looked at her daughter, Sophia Sterling, who sat at the end of the table. Sophia wasn't eating. She was staring at her phone, her face pale. The alerts haven't stopped. The board members are resigning one by one. They're calling it the Nash liquidation. Enough, Margaret snapped, the gold bracelets on her wrist clashing like armor. We are the Nashes. This club is built on our land. These people are our guests. We will finish our brunch and we will walk out of here with our heads held high. At that moment, the heavy mahogany doors of the dining room swung open. The club manager, a man who had bowed to Arthur for 2 decades, didn't approach with a fresh pot of coffee. Instead, he stood aside to let Victoria Nash enter. She wasn't wearing the modest, fading clothes they had mocked for years. She wore a charcoal wool coat that looked like it cost more than Rachel's car, and her hair was pulled back in a sharp, uncompromising blade of silk. Behind her walked Julian Vane, his leather briefcase held like a whetted axe. The room went tomb quiet. A waiter froze mid-pour, coffee steaming into a cup that was already full. Victoria didn't look for a seat. She walked directly to the head of the Nash table, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Victoria," Arthur said, trying to summon his old authority. He didn't rise. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here after the chaos you caused last night. Leave now, and I might not have you arrested for theft of corporate documents." Victoria didn't flinch. She leaned down, placing her hands flat on the white linen tablecloth. The scent of her perfume, something crisp, cold, and undeniably powerful, cut through the heavy smell of the buffet. "The documents weren't stolen, Arthur. They were reclaimed. And as for leaving," she glanced at Julian. The lawyer stepped forward, sliding a single thick blue folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, right on top of Arthur's untouched plate of eggs. "Mr. Nash," Julian said, his voice carrying to the neighboring tables. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, the Sterling Nash Country Club has been acquired in a private sale. The land, the structures, and the outstanding debt have been rolled into a new holding company, Emma's Light LLC. Arthur's features didn't just fall, they seemed to dissolve. The arrogant set of his jaw, a line he had held like a fortress for 70 years, crumbled into a trembling mess of loose skin and frantic tics. His eyes, usually sharp with the cold appraisal of a man who owned everything he saw, became glassy and unfocused, darting toward the exits as if the very air in the room had turned to poison. The ruddy, Scotch-fueled color of his cheeks drained away, leaving behind a sallow, sickly gray that made him look suddenly, devastatingly fragile. His mouth hung open, a silent, dark cavern of disbelief, while his throat worked convulsively as if he were trying to swallow a stone. "What are you talking about?" Margaret hissed, grabbing the folder. "This is a private club. We are life members." "You were," Victoria said, her voice a calm, lethal edge. "But the new ownership has a strict policy regarding financial integrity. You've been using the club's accounts to float your personal lifestyle for years, Margaret. That ends today. Julian." "The locks are being changed as we speak," Julian informed them, his tone clinical. "Your memberships have been revoked for cause." Furthermore, the Sterling family estate in the hills was used as collateral for the last 3 bridge loans you took out to cover the trust's losses. Those loans have been called in. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. A collective gasp rippled through the buffet line. Sophia Sterling finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide as she watched her mother's face. Rachel looked as if she were about to faint, her hand clutching the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "You can't do this," Rachel stammered, looking around at the witnesses. "Victoria, we're family. Think of Sophia, she has nowhere to go." Victoria turned her gaze to her niece. For a moment, the ice in her eyes softened. "Sophia is welcome to stay in the guest house at my new home in Palo Alto. She's already accepted the invitation. She's also accepted a scholarship to the same private academy Emma will be attending. It seems she's tired of living in a house built on lies." Rachel turned to her daughter, her mouth agape. "Sophia, you're leaving me." "I'm going where people don't use me as a trophy, Mom," Sophia said, her voice small but remarkably steady. She stood up, leaving her designer handbag on the chair. She walked over to Victoria's side, the physical shift in loyalty as clear as a line drawn in the sand. Arthur finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a pathetic wheeze. "You think you've won? You're just a girl from a gutter. You have nothing without the Nash name." Victoria leaned in closer, her eyes locked onto his. "The Nash name is a debt, Arthur, and I've just paid it in full. I didn't come here to argue. I came to tell you that the buffet is over." She reached out and took the silver serving spoon from the dish in front of Arthur, dropping it onto the floor. The clang echoed like a funeral bell. "The car is waiting, Sophia," Victoria said, turning her back on the wreckage of her family. She didn't look back to see Margaret's silent, weeping rage. She didn't stay to watch Arthur try to stand, only to sink back into his chair as the club manager approached with 2 security guards. She didn't listen to Rachel's frantic pleas to the old friends who were already moving their chairs away, physically distancing themselves from the stench of a falling empire. As Victoria and Sophia walked toward the exit, the whispers began, a rising tide of gossip that would ensure the Nash name was never spoken with respect again. Victoria felt the morning sun hit her face as she stepped out of the club. The air was clean. The weight was gone. "Where's Emma?" Sophia asked as they reached the sleek black SUV waiting at the curb. "She's already at the hangar," Victoria said, checking her watch. "She's reading her poetry to the pilot. He actually seems to like it." Victoria opened the door for her niece, then paused, looking back one last time at the sprawling, opulent building that had been her prison for so long. She saw the curtains of the dining room flutter as someone, perhaps Margaret, watched them go. Victoria didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply got into the car and closed the door, the sound of the engine muffled and powerful. As the vehicle pulled away, a notification chimed on her phone. It was a wire transfer confirmation. The final pieces of the Nash holdings had been liquidated. The empire was gone. The lion was awake. And the flight to Palo Alto was boarding in 20 minutes. 6 months had passed since the wheels of the private jet touched down in California, leaving the suffocating legacy of the Nash name 3,000 miles behind. In Palo Alto, the air didn't smell of floor wax and ancestral resentment. It smelled of eucalyptus, salt air, and the electric hum of a world moving forward. Victoria Nash stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, watching the morning fog retreat from the valley. She wasn't wearing the stifling pearls or the tailored armor Margaret had once demanded. Today, she wore a simple silk blouse and dark trousers, her hair loose. She looked younger, the permanent crease between her brows finally smoothed away by the Pacific sun. On her desk sat a sleek, matte black tablet displaying the morning's analytics for the Nash Foundation, the venture she had built from the liquidated remains of a dying empire. The door chimes signaled a visitor. Julian Vane walked in, looking remarkably relaxed for a man who had spent 3 decades tethered to the whims of the elite. He carried a leather briefcase and a small, knowing smile. "You look well, Victoria," Julian said, taking a seat in one of the ergonomic chairs. He didn't wait for an invitation. Their relationship had long since transcended the boundaries of attorney and client. They were survivors of the same war. "I feel well, Julian." Peace is a powerful cosmetic. She sat across from him, the quiet snick of her espresso machine the only sound in the room. "I assume you have the final reports from the East Coast." Julian sighed, opening his briefcase. "The transition is complete. The main estate was sold to a developer last week. They're turning the grounds into a public botanical garden and the house into a conservatory. I think the irony would have killed Arthur if the shame hadn't already done the job." Victoria felt a momentary pang, not of regret, but of a distant, faded grief. "And Margaret?" Julian leaned back, his expression turning clinical. "Your mother-in-law is currently residing in a 2-bedroom condominium in a gated community in Florida. It's respectable, certainly, but it's not the Nash manor. I'm told she spends most of her time calling the homeowners association to complain about the height of her neighbors' hedges. They've started screening her calls." The image of Margaret Nash, a woman who once dictated the social calendar of an entire city, being ignored by a Florida HOA manager was a sharper sting of karma than any prison sentence. She had been stripped of the only thing she valued, her relevance. She tried to attend the winter gala last month, Julian added, his voice dropping an octave. She showed up in her vintage Chanel, expecting her usual table at the front. The committee told her the guest list was full. They didn't even recognize her name. She had to wait for her Uber at the curb while the new money drove past her in their Teslas. Victoria looked down at her hands. They were steady. It's the mediocrity that will hurt her most. She always said the only thing worse than being hated was being common. She's common now, Julian confirmed. And Rachel, she's still in the city, though the sterling name took a significant hit when the bankruptcy filings went public. She reached out to me last week, asking for your private number. She said she wanted to rebuild the sisterly bond. Victoria's smile was thin and cold. She wants a bridge back to the money, Julian. Did you give it to her? I told her you were unavailable for the foreseeable future. I believe she's currently trying to sell her jewelry to maintain the lease on her apartment. It's a steep fall from the penthouse. The victory was absolute, but as Victoria looked at the framed photograph on her desk, she felt the weight of the cost. The photo showed Sophia Sterling and Emma Nash sitting on a beach, their faces illuminated by a bonfire. Sophia looked happy, finally free of the crushing expectations of the golden grandchild label, but she was also an orphan of a different kind, living with an aunt because her own mother was too busy chasing shadows to be a parent. Victoria had won the war, but she had burned the family tree to the ground to do it. The Nash name was gone, replaced by a foundation that funded dyslexic researchers and unconventional artists. She had saved Emma, but she had lost the sister she once thought she knew. The door to the inner lab swung open, and Emma Nash stepped out. She was 13 now, taller, with a smudge of graphite on her cheek and a spark in her eyes that no longer needed to be hidden. She wasn't the problem child or the struggling student. She was a girl who had just filed her second patent for a carbon capture polymer. "Mom, Julian," Emma said, her voice confident. She held a thin, bound volume in her hand. The first proofs arrived from the publisher. She handed the book to Victoria. It was a collection of poetry, the cover featuring a minimalist sketch of a lion waking up in a field of tall grass. The title was simple, The Unspoken Logic Asterisk. Victoria ran her thumb over the embossed letters. "It's beautiful, Emma." "The science department at the university wants me to do a reading," Emma said, a shy but proud smile tugging at her lips. "They think the way I structure the metaphors helps explain the chemical bonds. I told them I just wrote what I saw." "They're lucky to have you," Julian said, his voice thick with genuine affection. As Emma headed back to her lab, chatting with Julian about the upcoming symposium, Victoria stayed behind for a moment. She looked at the book in her hand and the patent filing on her screen. This was the life she had gambled everything for. She walked over to a small mahogany box on the bookshelf, the only item she had brought from the old house. Inside sat the heavy, ornate Nash signet ring Arthur had tried to force onto Emma's finger years ago. It looked garish now, a relic of a world that valued bloodlines over brilliance. Victoria picked up the ring, feeling its cold, dead weight. She walked to the balcony and looked down at the courtyard where a fountain bubbled peacefully. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the gold band into the water. It sank instantly, disappearing beneath the ripples, lost among the common stones. She turned back to her office, the sound of Emma's laughter echoing from the hallway. The lion wasn't just awake, she was leading the pride. Victoria picked up her tablet and began to work. The price of the label had been high, the loss of a family, the destruction of a legacy, and the cold reality of a lonely victory. But as she watched her daughter thrive in the light of her own making, Victoria knew she would have paid it 1,000 times over. The empire was gone, and in its place, something far more precious had finally been allowed to grow. The silence in the room wasn't empty anymore, it was full of the future. Victoria Nash took a sip of her coffee, the bitter warmth a reminder of how far they had come. She was no longer a Nash, and she was no longer a victim. She was simply a mother who had done what was necessary, and for the first time in her life, that was enough.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.